Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 10 of Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Let's go. Chapter 10. No rest, no time, not normal. Yule pulled through on the second day of recovery, finally able to use his legs again after the healers nearly bled themselves dry getting him back to working order. Yethis was pivotal in this recovery, using the deepest parts of her healing knowledge to make sure Yule was back at full strength. Both Yethis and the other healers in First Cab began to notice odd things with the wounded humans over time, which made them all begin to wonder about humans as a whole. Some of the humans were healing normally, keeping pace with the local races as their wounds slowly closed themselves. Muscle wove itself back together and showed the same healing pains as a valley elf or an oni. Other humans healed far more quickly, and in one regard healed naturally. Violet was one such human. Despite having not been given strong healing magic, she had pushed several shrapnel pieces and rifle rounds out of her body, and was right as rain after a single night's sleep. Other humans, such as Yule, shrugged off the pain of healing easily, and were walking around like nothing had ever happened to them. Helena had barely pulled through in comparison, blinking awake with her good eye to see herself staring up at the ceiling and covered in a warm blanket, a glass bottle of healing solution and blood trickling into her arms. Her one good ear twitched as she understood the words around her, her mangled ear twitching only half as much due to the amount of damage sustained to it. Her lungs and rib bones hurt. She remembered the feeling of that revolver round slamming into her body armor, and the sounds of her ribs shattering like glass. She had never felt a round as heavy as that before, and she was still wondering just what the hell she had been hit with. Her armor had done its job, but she felt a strong mind to upgrade and purchase one of the level 4 plates she had been hearing about.
They're not normal,
A medic said, shaking his head and prepping a bottle of blood solution.
Some of them aren't even healing right. I'm pretty sure that buckwheat fella's only 16 seasons old. Are they aging backwards?
A nearby satyr medic snorted, nodding her head in agreement.
They've never been normal, but it's becoming too much to ignore at this point. Though I don't think they're de-aging or anything.
Helena groaned and leaned up, her chest and stomach muscles recoiling in pain from the effort. But she managed to prop herself up on the pillow and look around. Medical Private Corwell and Medical Specialist Anru were sitting around with the other medicos, all of them preparing more medical supplies to replace the ones they had already used.
That Violet character grew a finger back. You know that, right? I had to cut it off due to how damaged it was, and it grew back.
Medical Sergeant Primary Domley muttered, rolling a peck of gauze around her fingers. The Valley Elf shook her head, closing her eyes.
Something is wrong with them. It's not all of them either. It seems random. I'm pretty certain Cody is talking to himself now ever since he came back from the northern flank.
Medical Private Corwell nodded, his long, curved, brim-touched horns catching the light in the windows.
I think you're right. Some of these humans are just normal, like us. I will say, if my memory serves correctly, that all original humans of Cosmoline Company are weird, enchanted.
I'd go with enchanted.
Medical Specialist Anru said, reaching down to prep another bottle that was sitting on her dark gray leg fur.
Though weird does have a far more logical ring to it. What do you mean, the original humans?
Domley asked, blinking her eyes at Corwell.
Are they all not like this?
Corwell shook his head.
No, not at all. All the original humans have these oddities. Yeah, some are fast, some can see very far, some heal. Hell, some of them even make the other soldiers stronger.
Yule does that one.
Helena piped up, and the medics turned to look at her as she winced, sitting up further on her pillow.
A lot of the other troopers who serve and fight close to Yule keep talking about how they don't feel fear.
That does explain what the other wounded were saying. The ones from the Gap.
Domley murmured, rolling another bundle of gauze.
Even when the magic and mortars came raining in, they still fought on. The medics down there ran out to grab more wounded, and that damned Gnoll fought to the bitter end to keep them safe. Gnolls don't do that. Gnolls cut and run when the battle is done. There was no need for him to stay there and fight like that. None of the troopers there should have been fighting so fiercely.
Anru pursed her lips prettily, straightening out the hem to her uniform shorts. The satyr couldn't wear full-size pants, so they were instead issued shorts so that the rest of their furred legs wouldn't overheat, but still keep their smooth-skinned thighs from getting sunburned. She personally was curious about the summer-cut shorts, as they were causing quite a stir amongst the satyr in the uniform testing sector.
But you said it was the original humans who do this. What about the others?
That's the odd bit.
Corwell replied, pulling out a wax paper-wrapped living bandage and checking on it to make sure it wasn't dying.
You know a few humans died back in New Samrion, right? The ones taken from Tallwheat? I did the exploration on one of the corpses and, well, his organs look like those of the ancient dwarf. Really old, decrepit, kidneys were failing, intestines rife with bile. It was like he aged 100 years in only a few months. And then there are the humans who are just like us. No oddities, just a regular old human who heals just as slow as we do.
Anru breathed out slowly, looking over to Medical Sergeant Primary Domley.
What about the new ones they captured? They found them wounded out in the snowfields and dragged them back kicking and screaming. You saw that human called Decimus behead the crazed one, right? They were taking off the gold necklaces with odd little gloves, and one of them went berserk. Since none of them are dead, I'd assume they are either normal or weird.
Domley murmured, leaning back in her chair and itching at one of her long Baliel ears.
Of course, they've just taken the collars off of them. They seemed afraid to touch him without those weird gloves. I think someone said one of those Fae made it for them.
Corwell shrugged.
We'll know within a few days, likely. The humans who draw the short straw tend to weaken quite quickly and fade away.
What powers have you observed?
Helena asked aloud to the room, now squinting and trying to remember as far back as she could when fighting alongside the humans.
I have only heard of Yule so far, and made my assumptions a while back.
Sergeant Major Wulf can use those pistols if he's really well, but I don't know if that's a power or not.
Corwell said, shrugging again and reaching down into his medical bag. Anru pursed her lips again, thinking before her eyes brightened.
Sergeant Major Chicks always knows when someone is hurt, and when someone is talking about her. I've seen her find wounds that no one had noticed before, and knew when we were talking about her hair all the way over on the other side of the room. I'm pretty sure that Sergeant Major Cole can talk to animals,
Domley said, thinking back to the human coaxing a stray Leem out of an alleyway.
Or at least he makes animals extremely comfortable around him. He's also been talking to that Fae.
Helena raised her brows.
The rumors are true then? About the Shy?
Clindurin, yes.
Domley said, nodding despite her face showing outward disgust.
The Sergeant Major appears to be able to find the minor Fae quite easily, even sniffing out a satyr that had run away from home and become lost in the woods.
Corwell snorted sadly.
Nellie was with him during that search. Some of the warcasters believe she can either hear fearful thoughts or talk to the plants themselves.
Didn't Nellie lose an arm?
Domley asked.
Yes.
Anru said, her mouth twisting.
Combat amputation at the bicep. She is recovered and the wound is clean, but she has fallen into a depressed state due to the loss of her limb. She has been heard mumbling in her sleep about how she is no longer beautiful and that no one will love her without her arm. Yule has been talking to her since he woke up, and I'm hoping she can gain a prosthetic from the dwarves or Oni.
Gonna be a lot of orders for the Rustninglags here in the future.
Corwell said, pulling out a small inner pack from his medical bag to organize it.
The worst part of this entrenchment combat is that most of the wounds are on the upper body. A lot of troopers are missing fingers, hands, or arms. I know that buckwheat fellow is missing a few fingers, something that happened to him while they were attacking the enemy artillery.
Helena smiled darkly, her eye patch glinting in the morning light filtering in through the window.
Oh yes, you can end up losing all kinds of things in this new style of war. Some better than others.
When Helena was released from the care of the medics, she winced and hissed her way back through town, finding that nice little cafe with the soup she liked. At a time like this, with a pain like this, she just wanted soup, hot bread, and cold butter. An ice cold cider wouldn't hurt either. Taking an outdoor seat bathing in warm sunlight, Helena leaned her head back, thinking about Boone and his last letter. He had broken his ankle trying to teach the troopers some human game called football, and a hard tackle by an Oni had put him in the infirmary. She wished he was here now, if only to make a little bit of the pain in her chest go away. She closed her eye, imagining the feeling of his hands against her, the smell of his clothes, but was gently tugged away by the conversation happening a little ways to her left. Her good ear twitched and she grumbled mentally, opening her eye into an annoyed slit.
Are you sure about that?
McKnight asked, the Agridaling leaning over the table to look wide-eyed at Pearlie.
Did he really say that?
Pearlie nodded, her hands resting on her hand muff as she fidgeted her fingers.
He talked with me at length about it. I think he wanted a neutral ear.
McKnight leaned back, whistling quietly as she grabbed a handle of her tea mug.
Why would he even fathom such a deal with that warlord, Pearlie? Did he not see the battle? Has he not seen what it has done to the land around us? Craters and holes, trees shattered to pieces. I mean, it's bad enough that half the town wants to try and preserve the trench as some kind of museum and defensive structure.
Can you blame them, though?
Pearlie said with measured calm.
Multiple Fae were killed in that battle, and it counts in their minds as a place where the enemy was halted by a true combined force, almost like the times of old. Southern elves, Brimtouch, orcs, halflings, everyone standing shoulder to shoulder and fighting against a common enemy. It's history, Megan.
McKnight scoffed, took a sip of her hot tea, then set it down with an angry twist of her mouth.
But allowing them to build a fort here, a fort with a warehouse, no less, what does that mean for Limstory? Are we all to be drafted into Yule's little army as well? March along with those loud wands and let the Fae forces break upon us? Did he even consider what the rest of us would think?
I don't believe he really has to, Megan.
Pearlie said tiredly, taking a bite of her breakfast and chewing thoughtfully. Helena blinked into the quiet, pulling in a deep breath as she waited for these two to start talking again. It wasn't long before the one called Pearlie broke the silence first.
I believe he believes this will be a major boon for the town. There will be a garrison aboard soldiers who want to eat, drink, sleep, need supplies while going out on the road for patrols. It will feed a steady stream of guilders and shanks to all of us,
Pearlie said, then frowned prettily while McKnight scoffed again.
Oh, come now, think of all those poor little towns and villages to the west. They put their trust into Queen Madmiran, and where did it get them? Dead. That's what it got then, Megan.
It was McKnight's turn to frown now, thinking about the horror stories of the villagers and townsfolk who were slaughtered by the orcs.
All she did was throw men at the problem, like they would know what to do. Got pushed all the way back to the long rail, they did, and had to flee over the bridges.
And here you'll stop them,
Pearlie said, taking a drink from her own mug before setting it down. She casted her eyes over to where Helena was relaxing, watching a waiter set down a drink for the mangled valley elf.
Roik knows strength when he sees it, and he knows results are better than the best rumour. That and imagine all of their inventions they'll bring.
McKnight raised a brow.
Inventions? What inventions? You mean besides those weird little wagons I saw running around on their little tubey wheels?
Lamps that light with no fire,
Pearlie said excitedly, this time leaning over the table towards McKnight.
special cabinets that make things cold even in summer, pipes that carry hot water into a home, little boxes that can carry a voice over miles, coils of metal heated by lightning and able to boil water, all without the need of wood.
The coils sound nice.
Magan admitted bitterly, already imagining how much easier it would make cooking since she wouldn't have to constantly fuss with fuel wood.
It's just... I don't know. Everything sounds too easy and too good to be true. How do we know that there isn't some kind of trick waiting in the shadows? How do we know he's not going to suddenly require us for campaign service or turn us all into slaves?
Because there's a contract.
Pearlie said with a shrug of her shoulders.
Signed by Yule himself.
Powers? Yule asked, sipping on his 5th mug of spiced winter cider as he held Alavara to him, the crimson-haired valley elf sitting on his lap as they shared the couch in their room. What do you mean, powers? Alavara leaned back against Yule and gave her hips a wiggle, eliciting the response she desired from the human under her. She, of course, was merely playing, as Yule was still recovering, and she hummed happily before speaking.
They say that some of the humans have odd little abilities to them. Violet grew back a finger, and Hayden's spit can stop bleeding on all manner of wounds.
Yule narrowed his eyes despite Alavara wiggling on his lap, and he scritched idly at her hip with the arm he had wrapped around her waist. He had read before that sometimes humans could live for a very long time here on this world, but he had no idea about any of them gaining powers. The thought both intrigued him and made him worry. Have any other humans under my command shown anything like that? Or is it just those two? Yule asked Alavara, taking another sip from his mug. Alavara had to think for a moment, laying against Yule and blinking up happily to the ceiling. She had been terrified when Yule had rolled in on a wagon, suffering from so many gunshot wounds that she thought the human was going to follow the same path as Mullen. However, despite the amount of damage he had sustained, it seemed that Yule's body refused to die. She wasn't sure if that was Cringe's doing or that maybe it was Yule's little special human power, but she was happy for it all the same. She had been prepared to stay by his side for as long as it took, but Yule was up and walking around within only a few days. Her heart had almost burst when he scooped her up while she was sleeping, having been watching over him since the first night, and she nearly cried while laughing.
I don't think I've noticed any yet, but at the same time I haven't been exactly looking. It may also just be subtle things like being able to run a little faster or have strength above gauge of normal humans. Not all special powers are being able to shoot fireballs out of the hand or summon rain with a thought.
Alavara said happily to Yule, even though she herself carried a rather abnormal power in the ability of reading minds and invading dreams. Subtle things, Yule murmured, breathing in deeply and setting his head against the back of the couch. Alavara heard his mind whirring with thoughts and mental noise, working through the implications this sudden revelation would involve. She was just happy to be able to hear his thoughts again, as the idea of no longer hearing Yule's mind filled her with an odd kind of dread. The feeling pressed its fingers against her now, but was quickly brushed away when Yule set down his mug and began running his fingers through her hair. Alavara hummed happily, closing her eyes and lacing her fingers together as Yule gently traced grooves in her hair, giving them a wiggle sometimes to toss her curls around. The sensation filled her with warm, fluttering feelings that made her heart soften, and then her mouth began to fill with saliva. Her stomach lurched, tightening with a gurgle as Alavara let out a strangled burp, and she launched herself onto her feet, running quickly to the half-empty pitcher of hot cider. Alavara, are you okay? Yule said in alarm, coming to his feet with a snap of his muscles. The hurling exhale of Alavara vomiting into the cider pitcher made Yule stumble to a stop, and he looked at his hands in horror. I make people vomit, Yule said in alarm, twisting his hands back and forth while Alavara continued to vomit loudly into the vase, her shoulders bucking as the bile came out of both her nostrils and mouth. Melanie chuckled from the edge of the forest, clasping her hands in front of her while Slaken stood beside her, his arms crossed smugly.
My goodness, you were not kidding when you said you had found a way to get around the old barriers.
Told you I could make it work, Slaken said with a wry grin, his sleazy Yamato form looking up at Melanie. Can't keep out this magic of mine. Besides, the humans are far more malleable. They have no rules about them. Melanie lowered her eyebrows but did not look at Slaken.
No rules? How do you mean, Slaken?
They are made of different stuff. Stuff I have never gotten my hands on before, Slaken said, wiggling his blue fingers. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought they were designed to break things. Writing has been a right fit ever since they came. Says they're destroying all its plans and machinations.
Yes, well, Wrighton doesn't ever know when and how to leave things alone. I'm sure he still thinks he can bind the humans within the constructs of the Great Answer or whatever he is always babbling on about.
Melanie said with a light waft of her hand.
I would rather he finally meet someone. It may calm him down.
Either way, there's nothing that old Slaken can't take care of, Slaken said, setting his large hands on his hips. Just like how I solved all the problems here and made the human super breeders. Melanie's face soured as she finally looked down at Slaken, then rolled her eyes when he waggled his eyebrows at her.
I believe it was our combined power that brings this victory, not the machinations of the primal god of fornicating.
Whatever you say, love bun, Slaken said in a purr, and failed to avoid the incoming slap from Melanie that rang his ear.
It only works with the power of love, you little cretin.
Melanie hissed at him, all while he inwardly screeched and clutched at his head.
Stop taking credit for everything.
Alderman Roych was still on the fence about Yule's offer. He knew that much when first cabs set off from the town of Limstory, but he also knew that the trepidation wouldn't last for long. The Stagling had seen the cost and fervor of modern warfare, and a little guard outpost of traditional local troopers would not do the job of even being a speed bump. Yule was thankful to be on the road now, even though he was way behind schedule to reach the meeting destination. He had an inkling it was about to change anyway, as news of the battle at Limstory was likely going to spread far and wide due to Harpy Post. His inkling turned into a full splatter when he was joined by a Harpy messenger from the far north of the Aranani Highlands, and Yule was surprised to see it was one of the yellow-winged tannies. His feathers were dark black with no shine of blue, but the bottom edges were lined with a bright canary yellow that darted up towards the wing claws. His skin was tan, which Yule surmised was the other part of the name, but not nearly as dark as the brush-feathered. More curious were all the little yellow spots all over the Harpy's face, almost as if someone had drawn freckles onto his face with an acrylic marker.
Mr. Yule, I bring a message from Queen Madmiran,
the Harpy said, bowing politely as he stood there perched on the wagon's front running board. Alavara and Yule raised their eyebrows. The Harpy was incredibly well spoken with a neutral accent, unlike a lot of the other Harpies. Only the Ravens seemed to be able to manage that, as even the Owl Harpy still retained a faint trace of their accent.
Good morning,
Alavara said happily, leaning forward to look at the Harpy as Yule was still observing him silently.
I don't think I've ever seen one of you before. Are you from way up north?
The yellow-winged Tanny blinked, not expecting to be asked a question, and the missive was already halfway out of his flight mail sack.
Yes. My clan is from the northern part of the Bear Perch. We are small, so we usually keep around that area. We don't fly south at all due to how we were received by the Sparrow and Himalaya.
Alavara asked, turning slightly to get Chikily in view. She nearly laughed when she saw the sparrow harpy fluffed up behind Yule and could actually hear him growling in his throat.
Oh, I see.
Alavara said with a snort, then reached over with her muff and thwacked Chikily with it.
Quit being rude, Chikily. This harpy is a guest on our wagon.
Chikily bristled a little less, but still kept his feathers hackled.
Harpy is gold-flecked. Only Fae gold-flecked.
See?
The other harpy said, looking more morose than angry about Chikily's outward aggression. Chikily, Yule said, reaching around and patting the sparrow harpy on the shoulder. If he was Fae, I would know. Trust me, he just has yellow colorations. Chikily's throaty little growls only dampened slightly, and Yule could do nothing but just chuckle. What message do you have for me? Yule asked the harpy, the rest of the passengers in the wagon turning their full attention to the little event going on in front of them. Even the centaurs walking nearby and infantry troopers were angling themselves to walk a little closer to the wagon in order to hear better, all watching the harpy pull out the large letter. Cody and Violet were both skimming along behind a female centaur on a sled with a few other humans, and he looked over towards the wagon.
Must be one of the minor clans,
Violet said, wiggling her regrown finger in her ear. Cody pulled out a finely tuned binocular and set it on Yule, slowly moving the focusing bar. Looks like he has some kind of missive for Yule. It has a royal seal and everything.
Are we going to a castle next or something?
Violet asked. Highly possible, Cody murmured. I know where we're heading. I've seen the maps, and this may be from that queen or something up that way. Violet turned to look at Cody, but squinted as a bit of his hair seemed to move unnaturally, as if something had brushed it away from his eyes so he could see better. To Yule's further surprise, the yellow-winged Tanny unfolded the letter, and then began to read it to Yule, clearing his throat elegantly as he swayed back and forth with the rhythm of the wagon.
Queen Madmiran, rightful ruler of Angendal and the Aranani Highlands, Iron Mother of Chopstow City, the ruler of these lands till her king does wake, beseeches Warlord Yule, the Goreblade wielder, the slayer of Fae, and dutiful champion of Krinja, to make direct haste to said capital of these lands, in order to be a guest of her court.
Why do they always call me a warlord? Yule muttered under his breath, while Alavara leaned over and kissed him on the cheek with a giggle.
Here within her most royal city, the Serbians will also be guests, and all parties shall meet in the grand hall of her castle to discuss their dealings, productions, contracts, and agreements. The great and generous Queen Madmiran will have her greatest and more powerful healers ready to receive the victorious wounded of Warlord Yule's forces, with all others being housed within the royal barracks safely behind the castle walls.
The harpy said, then rolled the message back up and pulled out a fresh piece of parchment.
I stand waiting to dictate your response, Mr. Yule.
Yule narrowed his eyes, then turned to Alavara, who had scooted closer to him. See, he calls me Mr. Yule. Why can't everyone else just do that?
What is your response, almighty warlord?
Mackerat asked from the back of the wagon, resting her elbows on the backboard and idly laying her chin in her hands.
This is a big queen we're talking about here. Madmiran is a powerhouse of political power and schemes, but she was never a commander of an army. Her losses to the west and war over the Long Rail River are gonna make her keen to use you in some way, and this response will allow her to gauge you quite accurately.
First Sergeant Erinda Caine looked over towards Mackerat, her eyebrows lowered and mouth in a disapproving line.
Specialist. It is going to be quite common for any kind of nobility to want to use us as a battle line. It's no secret the amount of attention we garnered when we assisted Prince Nim against his father. This changes quite dramatically with the aspect of an actual queen instead of some dandy princeling, as she will likely not use Yule directly but try to garner deals in the use of our troops in the retaking of the western towns and cities. We are, however, low on fuel, far beyond our supply lines, and there is simply no way we can help here except for defence, not on the attack. Once sit down with Yule, we'll set her straight.
The yellow-winged Tanny harpy was starting to sweat at the brow. He had no idea on whether or not he was supposed to write any of this down, and it all sounded quite important.
Well, yeah, First Sergeant.
Mackerrat replied, holding up her gloved hand as her breath came out in puffs of fog.
But she's going to make her early assumptions on you based off of the response for this letter. Not to mention that little shit's gonna tell her everything we've been saying.
The brim-touched pointed at the yellow-winged tanny harpy, who widened his eyes. He started, looking from Yule to around the wagon. Yule chuckled, kissing Alavara's knuckles and then looking up at the harpy. I have my response. Are you ready? You may get a bit of wrist strain. Queen Marill stared at the harpy with eyes slitted in confusion, the word still rattling around inside of her skull like a riddle. The yellow-winged tanny harpy was sweating openly, still holding the piece of paper in his hand with Yule's written response.
What do you mean? That's all he wrote back?
She asked imperiously, stepping quickly over to the harpy and snatching the letter out of his hand. There on the paper was a single word, just as he had reported to her.
Who in the hell just writes okay as a response to a queen's summons?
She bellowed, flipping the paper back and forth in her hand as if trying to find the rest of the missing words. The harpy, seeing his moment to leave, bowed, backing out of range of the queen and then skittering down the hallway. He had been warned by Yule not to speak of anything he heard at the wagon, and if he lingered there, the queen would know he had heard something. It was how he usually operated, after all, and also knew that if he skedaddled away, the queen would assume he knew nothing else. It had taken him quite a few days to get back to Chapstow City, as he had to fight a major headwind the entire way here, and wanted to get a good sleep at the messenger racks. The castle was in an uproar, everyone getting it ready for the first time a human warlord and a Serbian delegation would meet. The entire place was to play host to both forces, and it was an open secret that Queen Marill was going to try and placate Yule in the same way Prince Nim did. This was, of course, in order to make use of Yule's forces to push the orcs back, but rumors spread faster on the wind than they did on the roads. Harpies who ran into the first cab aerial scout units learned of the fuel woes and supply line stretching of Yule's forces, and it wouldn't be long before the Queen knew via osmosis of information. That was not his problem, though, and the harpy kicked open the door to the empty dormitory, flopping down into his bed and going straight to sleep. Around him, the castle continued to be polished, dusted, primed, and adorned with all the wreaths of power that Queen Marill could afford. She pulled out the stops for all the best wine, ale, and food she could afford, even making sure the slightly larger goblets were set at the tables. According to her estimations, Yule would be there within only a few days, as her messenger had been delayed and needed to rest along the way due to wind issues, and she was a jittery mess as she tried to get everything under control. When she became tired with all the affairs of getting ready, she made her way to where her husband still slept. She stopped at the door, smoothing down her gown and checking to make sure the ear caps on her short southern elf ears were straight. It had been quite a scandal when her husband, King Jacoby Erlin of the Erlin Noon, had married a non-Valley elf, let alone a southern elf. It had been such a to-do that he had decreed her to be a Valley elf, and that any notion of her being a southern elf were to be met with death. It was thought to be a joke, until he had 10 people hanged for calling her such during a royal parade after their marriage. He loved her, after all, and did not care that she was a southern elf. He had loved her for who she was, for her bright smile, and all because of the fact she had stopped to remove a butterfly from her gown, instead of smacking it away with a rush of a hand. Everyone called her a Valley elf now, just remarking with small jokes that her ears will grow in any day now. With the conviction of their king and his love for her, they quickly fell in line, but out of respect and out of fear for being the next victims to the gallows. She had taken the joke with good humor, even laughing when she heard it, and found herself out of breath for giggling when a common jewelry maker had made her these golden ear caps, making her look more the proper length for a valley elf. The king thought it a grand idea, commissioning all manner of ear caps for her, but she always liked to wear these nowadays, for they were the first pair he ever kissed. He had said she looked lovely in them, and for that they always made her happy. She opened the door, poking her head inside to make sure their children were not there. She had bore him 2 sons, Prince Ririn and Prince Aaron, and both bore the marks of their parents. Ririn took after his father, of course, angular in the face with long, proud valley elf ears. Aaron took after her, his ears a little bit shorter than his brother's, but still longer than hers. Oddly enough, they had both gotten her white hair, but bore the eyes of their father, shining honey against their tan flesh. They were, though, not there in the room at the moment, so she ducked inside, closing the door behind her. She felt her heart tighten as she walked up to the bed they once shared, looking down at the gaunt, weakened form of her husband. He had been so strong, his laugh easily carrying across a dining room at an easy joke. He was a warm person despite the hangings, and fair-handed. There were days she would lay across his chest as he sang quietly to her, her short ears feeling the vibrations of his voice while he wrote away at missives and paperwork. Now he lay there under the blankets, his skin always shining with sweat, eyes dark. He would have hated to see himself like this, having to be cleaned, bathed, wiped by his medical staff. They still struggled to get any kind of food into him, as he had nearly choked to death multiple times.
Hello, my love.
Queen Madmiran said quietly, sitting down next to him on the bed and brushing the stray strands of hair from his face. He always felt cold now, and it grew a terror in her that gripped at her heart with icy hands.
I'm getting the castle all ready for Yule. I told you about him, remember? The human?
She always paused, just in case, giving him room to suddenly wake up and respond. He, like always, did not.
He's coming here to meet the Serbians. Would you imagine his response? He told me, okay. As if I had asked him if he wanted more wine during dinner. The nerve.
Queen Madmiran laughed quietly, shaking her head as she ran her knuckle down her husband's, her king's, face.
I spent a lot of time humming and hoeing over that letter. And what does he do? Okay, he says. Such cheek.
Queen Madmiran placed the tip of her finger against his lips. Only a little bit of air from his nose tickled her skin. Less and less by the day.
I'm hoping he can help us take back the towns and cities we lost. We would have never lost them if you were here. I know that. You're so clever. Always were. I have no doubt you would have routed those damned orcs with ease and sent them running back west. Anyway, hopefully I can convince him to help us. He helped Prince Nim, you know. You remember him. He was only a little boy when his mother and father came to our wedding. I still wonder what happened to his mother, Queen Merva. They always called her people forest elves, of all things. They were just normal valley elves, living in the deep forests of the Blue Wood. I always found that funny.
she said, giving a small chuckle when she remembered how her husband had teased Queen Merva, even having a wooden crown crafted for her to wear at the dinner table during the feast. She looked down at her husband, his eyes unmoving under his eyelids and chest inching up and down in his fatigued breathing.
I hope that the human has some kind of magic about him. Humans have all kinds of fabled things with them. Things that can move air, heal even the most grievous wounds. Little machinations that can knit back together flesh. If he's here, maybe he can look at you and know what is wrong with you. He can help you, maybe. It's the only reason why I even want him here. Him and his other humans.
She murmured, tears beginning to well up in her sharp blue eyes as she ran the back of her fingers down his cheeks.
Maybe he can help you wake up after all these weeks. Your sons miss you, you know that? They miss hunting with you and making your funny little tables in the workshops. They need their father. Your people need their king.
She pressed her quivering lips together as the tears ran freely down her cheeks, unbarred by finger or hand. They plopped soundlessly onto the comforter, and Queen Madmirren began to openly weep as she stroked her husband's face with her trembling hands.
I need you. I can't do this all on my own. I don't know how to live or do anything without you. I miss when we used to go on walks and hold hands, and when I would lay on your lap while you sang to me. I need you to be here. I need you to help me. I can't sleep without you. I can't eat without you beside me, teasing me about how I eat too carefully. I need you to wake up, my love. I need you to wake up and show me how to live again.
Her hopes, her dreams, all lay on the chance that this human held a secret that no one else did. She wept carelessly, openly, pressing her face to her husband's while her shoulders bucked with her cries. Maybe, just maybe, she would see her husband blink his eyes open once again. They would have breakfast together once more, and she would butter his toast the way he liked, make him his tea, and they would sit out on the balcony to watch the sun rise over the city they built with their own hands. Maybe.
My queen.
Queen Madmirren jerked awake at the words, having fallen asleep beside her husband again. She looked around, and Benhelm, her castle steward, was leaning in just enough past the cracked door so she could hear him.
Yes, Benhelm?
Queen Madmirren said with a quick sniff, brushing down her day dress that she had fallen asleep in. It had been a couple days since she had received Yule's response, and the only time she ever caught rest was when she visited the comatose king.
The human has arrived on the outskirts of the city. I also received a harpy message that the Serbnyan delegate will only be a single day behind. They had run into an orc patrol and were delayed due to combat activities.
Benhelm said, the elderly brim-touch keeping his eyes down at the ground. He had told himself long ago, after the king fell ill, that these moments weren't for him. They were for his queen and her sons. But at the same time, he also did not want to see his king in such a state, not after knowing him since he was but a boy.
I see.
Queen Madmirren said with a rush of renewed energy, slipping her regal house shoes back onto her feet.
Are we ready?
Benhelm chuckled.
Yes, my queen, we are ready. I've also charged your wardrobe keepers to ready a fresh dress.
Yes, thank you, Benhelm. Would you ready the princess as well?
Queen Madmiren said briskly, opening the door and walking through it as Benhelm stepped backward, head still politely inclined.
I already have, my queen. Prince Rierin and Prince Erin are fully dressed and hopefully not getting jam all over their new tunics. I saw them eyeing the bread table quite fairly this morning and believe they may have snuck out again.
Benhelm said, only raising his head once the door to the king's chambers were closed. Queen Madmiren snorted out a laugh.
I do not understand why they have such a need to go and play at night. Remember when they took 2 of the war horses?
I believe they're acting out due to the health of their father.
Benhelm said, lacing his hands behind his back as he walked beside his queen.
Regardless, their minders have been keeping an eye on them. They were just shooting archery and having a bit of swordplay. Explains their hunger.
I bet they think they are so sneaky.
Queen Madmiren chuckled, then let out a pained sigh.
They are very much like their father.
The two walked out into the main reception area, the vaulted, large room a bustling hive of activity as castle staff ran back and forth with their final preparations. Queen Madmiren was constantly barraged with messages as the human warlord made his way through the city, and she knew the royal guards had already found him to lead him to the castle, just as they planned. At one point, she could even hear the roar of her citizens as Yule passed by the main square, and she knew he was close.
Places, everyone!
Queen Madmiren called out, clapping her hands as jeweled bracelets jangled and glittered on her wrists.
Everyone to their places! Prince Erin, how did you get marmalade on your trousers? Benhelm! Benhelm! Prince Erin has marmalade on his trousers! Get them changed quickly!
A surge of castle staff, along with Benhelm, quickly scooped up the chatting Prince Erin and rushed to get him changed.
You can't even see it. Mother, I'm wearing red trousers. They won't even be able to tell.
Prince Erin called out, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The clop of hooves on stone caught Queen Madmiren's ears. Her heart began to beat heavily in her chest, and she suddenly found her mouth very dry. She had to impress this man to the best of her ability in order to just have a chance at him helping her husband, and she could not risk making a mess of it. "Whoa," Yule murmured out, gently pulling back on the reins to his wagon horses as the royal mounted guards in front of him slowed to a stop. Behind him, the rest of his infantry were coming to a halt as well, his NCOs prowling next to the long line of infantry like predatory cats. They had nearly spent a day preparing uniforms and boots to look as nice as possible for this moment, and he didn't want any of his men looking untidy. Funnily enough, he had tried to make the wounded form a short camp outside the city, but they had outright refused. The worst of the wounded were still a limb story recovering, those who were too unfit to walk or travel. But not one of the wounded humans bothered to remain despite their injuries. Even Nellie, with a large portion of her arm missing, was not going to miss this journey. All the troopers were wearing clean and pressed garrison uniforms, the warcasters coming in clutch with both cutting and heating up stones to get out the wrinkles. The lone wanderers even wore a garrison uniform, though they themselves had floral braided infantry cords running down their shoulders. All Veil Rider troopers wore their own braided cords as well, denoting what they were in terms of job within the auxiliaries. Yule had wanted the infantry to switch their colors from blue to a brassy gold, a reference to rifle ammunition, but both the other humans and the local races themselves wanted to keep with American tradition, so infantry wore their blue braided cords. The medics bore a cord of green and red, at the top of which were metal badges, both the Red Cross and the Scapiran symbol for healers. Artillery had a multicolored cord that started with a braid of red and faded up into white. mimicking the glow and smoke of cannon fire. They too had a badge, usually marking what they fired, whether that was a mortar or an artillery piece. This pattern followed to the military police, green and yellow in their braided cord with a pair of crossed M9 pistols as their badge. Engineers with their red and white and crossed lumber axes. The pure black braid of those who drove armored vehicles with the badge of what vehicle that was. The pure white of transport troopers with their truck badge. The alternating black and white blocks of signal with their radio badge, and the scouts with their braid of green and reticle badge. Yule wore a special braided cord of his own creation, a braided cord made up from the name tapes of those who had died under his command. The cord had to be twice wrapped, and Yule knew that soon it would have to wrap around his back to his other shoulder. He had jokingly called it the yoke of command, a dark joke that made most of the humans chuckle while others blanched. Yule's NCOs, who had also started keeping name tapes, followed this pattern, and every sergeant major had their own braided cords of name tapes.
Battalion, attention!
Sergeant Major Domino called out, Severus standing beside him and proudly beaming in her own specially made garrison uniform. It looked a lot like Domino's, except she wore combat blades on her talons and a Himalaya war plate across her chest to mark her status. The uniform stomp of boots coming together filled the air with a loud thud. Troopers slamming their rifle stocks to the ground in order arms. Yule dismounted the wagon as a side door to the main doors opened, a little cloister of castle staff coming down the stairs. Yule held up a hand and helped Alavara down, who was also dressed in a garrison uniform and bore the floral shoulder braid of the Lone Wanderers. Yule had wanted her to wear something pretty, such as a dress. But the fight that had caused nearly took down their tent during the big to-do of getting ready to enter the city. There had also been the issue of both Alavara and everyone else wanting to wear their battle gear into the city with their rifles, but Yule was able to convince them to only do rifles. Instead, their battle gear was arranged in wagons and kept under heavy guard, which he was going to make sure were parked within the castle. All of his troopers had, thankfully, fit inside the expansive grounds of the castle, which would make this a little easier.
Parade rest!
Domino bellowed, and the troopers moved as one as they spread their feet for a little more comfort, placing their free hand in the small of their backs and tilting out their rifles. "Staff on me," Yule called out. And soon he was joined by the forms of his human sergeant majors, medical staff sergeant Yethis, first sergeant Erinda Caine, private Chikily, specialist Mackey, and, of course, Ramella. "Since when are you my staff?" Yule murmured down to the Fae, raising a brow at her as the humans all admired the huge castle before them. Ramella just winked.
You should be so lucky to have someone like me on hand.
"I don't want you on either of my hands," Yule growled, then grunted when Alavara elbowed him in the ribs, nodding her head towards the castle staff who was now waiting patiently. Yule saw an older Brimtouch standing at the most front, graying at the temples but still blending smoothly into the rest of the dark brown hair that ruffled around his short, twisting horns. He was also wearing a rather stoic suit, and Yule was kinda glad it wasn't some fancy tunic or something of the sort. Yule itched at his knuckles, then strode towards the little gang of Scapirans while his own people followed behind.
Warlord Yule,
Benhelm said politely, then bowed forward at the waist a few inches.
we await to graciously receive you.
Yule gave a short sigh. Yule will do.
As you wish.
Benhelm said as he stood.
I've been sent forward by my queen to greet you and help you arrange the storage of your wagons and men. We have emptied our royal barracks to house your men and have set up refreshment tents for all of them as well. We may not be able to accommodate all of your men within the castle, but we can still treat them to a nice lunch.
Yule chuckled. I appreciate that. A staff sergeant but he stopped, seeing the confused look on the man's face. He quickly shifted gears, turning and pointing. That valley elf over there, with the gold around his rank, is in charge of the wagons. You can speak with him on where they need to go. As well, they will be guarded by my own men at all times, and I want no one else near them.
Of course.
Benhelm said with another bow, then straightened up and gestured towards the main doors.
I shall accompany you inside. Is there anything that I should say as we enter the reception gallery?
Yule took Alavara's arm in his. There's no need for it.
As you wish.
Benhelm said, part of his own castle staff breaking away to show Yule's first cab where to go. Yule took a step forward, then cocked his head as he considered a thought. He instead turned, looking over his shoulder. First cab! Eyes! Yule bellowed, and all their heads snapped towards him at the order. He grinned. Fall out and refresh yourselves on this Queen's Guilders. That's an order. And that is the end of Chapter 10 of Book 4. If you like these stories and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Join the coffee, join the Discord, join me on X and follow me, I don't fucking know. Share the stories with those who you think could use an hour to help their day pass by. And maybe, just maybe, inject a little fantasy juice into their workday as well, because I know it's a fucking slog out there. Now, if you do join us on Coffee, and you do become a member, members get sneak peeks, special Discord channels for watching art get made, all the art whips, they get discounts, they get stuff. But most of all, they help us keep this channel running, because YouTube certainly fucking isn't. And first up are the First Shirts. These guys give $50 per month, help pay for the VAs, help pay for art, and they are carrying this channel on their shoulders, and I honestly should probably send you guys a card or something. If the First Shirts want a card, let me know. I'm gonna send you a fucking card. I'm gonna send you a New Year's Day card, because you made my year. You guys, you motherfuckers made my year. E-Machino, Cody Jero, Desk Dancer, and Insane Medic. Then there is the E4 Mafia. These guys give me $25 a month. And you know what? These motherfuckers deserve a fucking card too. If First Shirts and E4 Mafia want cards, let me know. I'll get you y'all's address and send y'all a card. That's the Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. Then there's Snuffy Squad. These guys give $5 a month. It's time for the lightning round. There's Super Stink 64, Elderock, Crowman, Karina Kestrel, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Sean Holt, Andrew N. Gill, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Ranger Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and I'm the Lore Smith. And until we see you next time, on this side of the veil, that was Rue. That was Technoward, that was Simba, that was Hailey, that was Vynn, that was Amanda, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.